Our epistle reading, our reading from the New Testament, is taken from the letter to the Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 5 and verses 15 through 20. I would invite you to listen with open ears and open mind to this reading in Ephesians and hear what the Spirit might speak into your life today. Ephesians 5 and 15. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, singing and making melody to the Lord in your hearts, giving thanks to God the Father at all times and for everything, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I like the aging apostle's kindly advice as he closes his letter to the Ephesians. Here's a paraphrase of what we just read. Be careful how you live. Choose wisdom. Make the most of the time that you're given. And also consider whistling and humming and singing to yourself while you work. Try to be happy. Then people will know that the Spirit of God is in you. Be grateful for things. Be grateful for everything, at all times and in all places. I think that's lovely advice. Tacked on to the end of the letter, probably scribbled in the margins in an old man's spidery script near the end of the page. But I'm a little surprised here that Paul tackles the topic of time management. Isn't that more like a John Maxwell kind of thing to do? Does the apostle really want to tackle the subject of time? Time is a mystery, and it stymies all of us. When we're not trying to save time, we're usually trying to race against it or maybe even trying to kill it. No one knows if time is on their side or not, nor how much of it we'll get in the end. Who truly knows what time is worth? Do we pass this way but once, or is there some blessed, wonderful loop whereby we get to come back and fix our mistakes from the first time around? Time is a mystery, and not always one that seems friendly to us. It has cheated us, every one, taking away the gifts that it's given us. Time has blessed us all too with healing and with wisdom and with forgiveness that only time can give. Time. What would it mean amid the busyness of your life to make the most of the time that you've been given? You know, I do love my job. It's not as hard as some people think, and it's not nearly as easy as other people think. And yet it does occasionally have its seasons of stress. I know this because I keep a journal, and I can look back and see what those stressful seasons were, though I don't often look back. One of the most stressful moments of my career came, I think, in November of 2017. Back in 2017, we had 6 funerals in 1 month, and 2 of them on the same day. Now, all funerals are hard, but some of those were very, very hard. I woke up on a Friday morning with another funeral coming on a Saturday the following day, and I had had a headache for a week, and I had to get the kids on the bus and hurry out the door, and I knew that I would have 20 emails waiting for me at the office, and at least 2 folks who needed visits, and several nagging administrative jobs that needed to get done that day. I'm not trying to make you pity me. November's already a busy season at church, you know, with Advent coming up and the interfaith Thanksgiving service. I had a funeral sermon to write, I had a Sunday sermon to write, and back in those days, I don't need to remind you, I wrote long sermons. And what day did I have to do it? Saturday was already booked with a funeral. I had to do it now. I had to do it today, Friday. Worst of all, each task requires a different kind of energy, a different kind of skill, a different kind of person. bold administrator, gentle listener, quiet writer. I was anxious, and I was harried, and I was hurried, and I was not going to do good work that day. Headed to the door, I noticed how quiet the house was. And back in those days, it was rare for me to be home alone. Early morning sunlight came streaming through the windows, those antique windows that we have downstairs, at an angle that I rarely saw. And it was the blessed sunlight of November, which is so rare. And the old glass has a rippled surface, and so when sunlight refracts off of it onto a wall, it looks like sunlight shining off of a pond, except still. Dappled, riffled, motionless. In the golden hue of the moment, in perfect silence, surrounded by a house I thought I knew, but which was transfigured in this new light, and surrounded too by mysteries and beauties too subtle to be noticed every day, I had to pause. And in a moment of complete stress, and I'm not nice when I get stressy, in a moment of complete stress and anxiety, a wisdom from outside of me stole up and reminded me of something that I've always known but often forget. And it's a wisdom that has spoken to you too at certain moments of your life, usually when you just need it, always when you don't expect it. In this case, it reminded me that this time was precious too, and rare, a moment I would never hold again, and that I was not going to be the person I needed to be that day in the condition that I was in. This hour would pass, like the sunlight on the wall, like the cat sleeping in the chair, like the silence too would pass. Just pausing reminded me that the jobs toward which I was rushing were not burdens, but sacred tasks and privileges. In that moment, I knew that I had but one duty. I needed to make eggs. Scrambled, the easiest kind, the quickest. It was not emails, it was not managing a church, it was not writing sermons, though it encompassed all of that. My one task that day was to be the person the world needed me to be. Be the person my people needed me to be the person my family needed me to be the person God called me to be, and to be the person I needed me to be in a good space, even amid stress. And in that particular moment, it meant doing a few exercises and making scrambled eggs and sitting in the silence of a place that had been so many places in its time in my life. And reading Psalm 84, look it up, it's great. How lovely is thy dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. Even a sparrow makes her nest at thine altar. I got to the office half an hour late, maybe 45 minutes. All the work got done, and it got done better by a calm, refreshed person than by a frazzled, hurried, harried little guy rushing from task to task. The tyranny of the urgent frequently dictates my life and my days as it does yours. But amid the busy routines of our days, if we forget why we do the things we do, if we live life's duties and demands and forgetting the love that calls us to undertake them, what good can come of it? Who needs a pastor visiting them who hasn't spent a moment or two in quiet prayer? Who needs a friend or a parent or a spouse or even an employee or a boss who hasn't spent a moment or two lost in the good stuff, the life-giving stuff, things of beauty, things of renewal, things of hope? Time is not an enemy. It's a generous friend. And we do the world and others and ourselves very little good if we do not make better use of the time that we have been given. Speaking of which, time is running out for the Apostle Paul. Ephesians was written toward the end of his life. He's softening. He's growing old. He's not quite as strident as he used to be, like back in Romans. He's less insistent than in his earlier letters, though he is still the king of the run-on sentence. Paul can write a run-on sentence like nobody but Virginia Woolf. Always the king of the run-on sentence. He dithers away the last 2 chapters of his epistle with fatherly advice for his faraway friends. And it looks at several places like he's drawing to a close. He's winding things up, and then he thinks of more things he wants to say. Oh, and by the way, choose wisdom. By the way, you should whistle more. By the way, hum. Make melody in your hearts. Be happy. Don't give yourselves over to drunkenness. That's an escape. You need to face the world with the things of the Spirit. Be plugged into God so that you can live a joyful life. It's basically what he's saying. Humming and whistling and making melody while you work. It's not bad advice. There is a fullness of life in treasuring the moments as they slip through our fingers like sand, in savoring them as they pass, and filling them with meaningful stuff, meaningful tasks, acts of mercy and beauty, making the most of the time that we're given. It's just that time feels unlimited until it doesn't. It's just that it feels like you have all the time in the world until you're reminded that you actually don't. Time feels like a neutral thing that you can be taken for granted. Time is like water. Time is like air. They seem so unspectacular until they begin to feel scarce, and then you start to think about them. A wise woman had a big glass jar, the kind they used to sell dill pickles from, on the counter at the grocery store. She had one of those big glass jars, and she assembled her children in front of her. And she began filling that jar with stones about 2 inches in diameter. And when she got to the top of the jar with the stones, she asked her children, "All right, kids, is the jar full?" They said, "Yes, you couldn't get any more in there." And then she lifted a bowl of pebbles, the kind of pebbles that you would put at the bottom of a fish tank. And she began to gently roll the pebbles in among the stones. And they trickled down in and they filled up the spots that were left between the larger rocks. And she turned the jar as she did it so that they would descend and fill in all the spaces. And then she said to her children, "How about it now, kids? Is the jar full?" And the kids said, "Yes, you couldn't get anything else in there." And finally, she took a container of sand and she sifted the sand slowly into the jar, and she shook it and she turned it until all the sand had gone down into the jar. And she asked the children again, "Is it full?" And they said, "Yeah, it's definitely full now." And their mother said, "This jar is your life. The rocks are the things that matter most, and you have to put them in first. These are your health. These are the people you love. These are your faith. These are your happiness. These are things you cannot replace. The rocks are the most important things. The pebbles are things that matter. The pebbles are your job, your reputation, your car, your house. The sand is the stuff that doesn't matter all that much, but which seems very important at the time. The busy stuff of life. The reports, the emails, the meetings, the parties, the scrolling on your phone. It's the small stuff that will rush in and fill any space that you give it. So the rocks are the important stuff that can't be replaced. The pebbles are the stuff that you can and will replace, but it's kind of important. And the sand is just the stuff of daily life. And she told her children, "Every day you will fill your jar. If you put the sand or the pebbles in first, then there's no room for the really important stuff, the stuff that matters. If you spend your time and your energy on the stuff that matters little, then you won't have room for the stuff that matters a lot. But if you put the most important things in first, all the other stuff will fall into place around it." You know, I love these late summer days, when summer inches to a close and the morning air is touched with that late summer chill. It always makes me nostalgic. It always makes me a little wistful for when I was a kid and that smell on the air in the mornings meant going back to school. always touched with just a little bit of anxiety, because I was always the new kid at school. I think of the diesel fumes of school buses, which you Mount Lebanon kids have never experienced. Memory recalls to me all the fresh tomatoes from the garden rotting in paper bags on the floor, and the sound of cicadas, which come in the second half of the summer and herald the end of the season. And all the freedom of summer break and all the plans and all the idleness and all the stuff you had hoped to do before school started up again. Some of it got done and most of it did not. There are no words for the feelings that a changing season can bring upon us. Or a smell, or an old tune, locked away somewhere, in a place you seldom, if ever, go. It's all still there. All the memories of all the times you've ever lived, all the people you have been in your life, they're all still there, right where you left them, just waiting for a word or a sound or a smell to summon them back out into the light. All the golden years with their share of sorrows and joys, their nights, their days, their hours, nothing is lost. In the great economy of eternity, no good thing is ever finally lost. For all goodness is just part of the life of God. And God is deathless, and God is eternal. God is timeless. And so each beautiful moment and every lovely soul is cherished away somehow in the life and the mind of God, from whose generous hand our times come. And so we must make the most of our time, not because it's short. In some ways, it touches on eternity. In some ways, these moments that fleet are all eternal. We make the most of our time because we are destined to know life and its wonders, incrementally, thing by thing, moment by moment, one thing at a time. We make the most of our time not because we will someday have no more, because which of us does not have a sense of eternity somewhere in our lives? Have we not brushed up against it, however rarely? No, we make the most of our time because it is the tool that we are given to know and to express our love for those to whom we belong. It's the canvas on which we live out our life's calling, the page on which we write our life's story. If not for time and its constant passing, would we ever know to love as urgently as we must? Would that we could sense the eternity that these moments contain. Would that we can sense their connectedness to eternity. If we know their eternity, then we can go back to our lives and live them without grasping and without fear, and maybe whistling more than we do, and maybe humming, and maybe being more grateful and more joyous than we are, just like Paul suggests. The advice of an aging Paul, which he gives as he looks back on his own life well spent, is this: first things first. First the rocks, then the pebbles, then the sand. Tend to your spirit, and the other stuff will fall into place. Don't lose your focus on the things that really do matter. Practice gratitude, and sing more than you do. Maybe hum or whistle. Make melody in your heart to the Lord. Live with joy. Come what will. Time marches on, it passes. It comes upon us quickly and it rapidly fades. But time is a gift, and somehow there's always enough. We just have to put the stones in first, and the other stuff falls into place. Make the most of your time, for it is precious. Each moment that passes is unlike any before it or any after it, and it contains eternity within it. Make the most of the time that you are given. Amen.